Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Alaska Weather, your Alaska Weather. This is meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and tonight is December 14th, Wednesday, 2016. As always, you can keep up with us for our weather info line. It's 1-800-472-0391, and you get to a forecaster 24/7 by calling that number. Weather.gov/Alaska. It'll take you to the regional perspective for the Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage office. And then if you have any comments or feedback, you can send them to nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, and we will get back with you most likely the next business day. So let's start off with our hazards, and we've got quite a variety of hazards along the west coast here, as we do have an approaching low pressure system, and we're getting ready to start to move into a rather active storm pattern. So taking a look here, basically working from south to north, a warm front is approaching from the west, and with that we do have some warmer air riding up over colder air trapped in the valleys here near McGrath and Unalakleet. And so we do have the potential for some freezing rain down here. That's the advisories down there, winter weather advisories for freezing rain. As we get a little bit farther to the north of Stebbins, at that point you'll see things change over to more of a snow, but with strong easterly winds feeding into this front, we do expect some blowing snow conditions. And those are out until about midnight tonight, some of these until 3 in the morning. And then a little bit further north, up north of the Seward Peninsula, near Shishmaref and Kotzebue, those are for more of accumulating snow, 3 to 6 inches in some locations, 2 to 4 in other locations, and some of those are out until about 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Also, St. Lawrence Island getting in on the winter weather advisories. So for more details up in the Fairbanks region, take a look at the Fairbanks local office for the exact timing and amounts of all those expected snowfalls and freezing rain accumulations. Taking a look at our headlines for tonight, an active storm pattern is going to be developing. Again, we're going to see that start to move from west to east from the Bering Sea over to the west coast and even get into south central and southeast Alaska. So what was a very quiet, high pressure, cold winter pattern is about to change, and we're going to see some warming temperatures to go with that as well as we switch our flow from an offshore northerly flow to more of an onshore south to southwest flow. That's also going to bring increasing snow chances as we're starting to bring some of that moisture up from the Gulf of Alaska and certainly from the Bering Sea for the west coast. So for those snow lovers out there, chances for snow across south central will certainly be increasing from this high and dry pattern that we've had for the past 7 to 10 days. And then another area of concern is way out west in our marine zones near the western Aleutians. We do have a hurricane force wind warning out there, and we'll talk about what's causing those hurricane force winds here as we go through our show tonight. So what is causing those hurricane force winds? Well, let's start out by looking at our current storm system. Here it is. You can see the big counterclockwise swirl, and that is the storm system that has pushed this first front onshore, and there's the moisture associated with that. This now is weakening. This area of low pressure is weakening, and the new one, you can see the very bright cloud tops here. That's indicative of how high they go in the atmosphere, and the colder at the top of the atmosphere, so thus the brighter they show up in this infrared picture. And this storm is going to basically absorb this previous low and become the dominant low as we go into the next couple days. Otherwise, across the state, for most areas, it was a rather nice day as high pressure remained in control, basically from the western portion of the Alaska Range all the way back to southeast Alaska. Maybe just a few clouds skirting there along the coastline, but otherwise, even though this looks like a rather cloudy day, it's just the cold temperatures trapped in the valleys that show up and cause the infrared picture to be a little bit skewed. but otherwise mostly clear conditions across the interior and plenty of sunshine across the Cook Inlet region. Let's take a look at that again. There's our front moving in along the west coast, so we do have some mixed precipitation, and again, those snowfall amounts and possibility of some freezing rain there up in the valleys with the colder air trapped. And one more time, our high pressure continuing to push the moisture away from the coastal areas, and this front is going to continue to work its way towards the Cook Inlet region, and with that we should see again increasing chances for moisture to make its way inland. So for today's weather, there's our front there along the west coast. You can see mostly rain for the Alaska Peninsula, but there's that mixed precipitation. You get a little bit farther inland, it's a little bit colder. So places like Antioch have just gotten above freezing, but inland of there near Sleep Mute and Sparevon, things should be mostly snow. But then as you go up along the west coast and towards the Seward Peninsula, that's where we do expect a little bit more of that freezing rain, and then eventually becoming all snow once you're up farther to the north. Some fairly strong winds moving from south in this region and then from the east up towards the Seward Peninsula, so that's going to create those blowing snow conditions, or that's what is creating those blowing snow conditions along that frontal boundary. And then as we look back towards south central and southeast Alaska, again a clear day for the most part, especially across the Cook Inlet region and the Copper River Basin, clear and cold for many of those places. And then towards southeast Alaska, just some light rain offshore, maybe impacting the marine zones associated with this stationary front, but this will continue to slide away as our storm systems from the west start to become dominant. Now here's that first low at 974. Let's jump to tonight. That low again has been absorbed by this stronger area of low pressure at 949. This low has much better jet support at about 30,000 feet. There's a strong area of about 170 knot winds. We'll talk about that on our slides here, but that is what's helping to support such a deep low. Not record breaking by any means, but certainly a strong low, a December western Bering low, pretty typical for this time of year. And again, that's really what we're going to be watching. There's the potential for those hurricane force winds. That really tightly packed isobars means that there's a strong pressure gradient, and with that, that's where you get those really strong winds. And so we call that a sting jet as it wraps around. It's kind of like the stinger of the storm, and it wraps around, and that's where we expect those hurricane force winds to be just south of Shemya and Attu and Adak. And then along the west coast there, we'll expect the rain and snow to continue, more of a mixed precipitation just north of the Bristol Bay area, and then becoming all snow as you start to work your way northward. And that will creep inland, but it's not going to make it as far as the interior portions of the state. For much of south central, just expect patchy fog again tonight, but for the most part, not really any significant precipitation to speak of tonight. And for southeast, again, a clear and cold night there. Now as we get into the day on Thursday, that's where we start to see that moisture work its way just a little bit farther to the east, and there we will start to see it impact the western portions of the Kenai Peninsula, and rain will move into Kodiak Island. Some of that snow will try to penetrate into the interior portions. Don't expect this to hold together very well, as there's not much in the way of any upper level support. You can see the trough associated with it is now up here along the along the Arctic coast, and so not much in the way of support, so these should just be some light snow showers. Do see the strong storm though still at about 949 millibars, and that is continuing to make its way eastward through the Bering. We're going to be keying in on this front to be an active weather maker for the weekend, but mostly rain as this thing brings up a lot of warm air, so we are seeing another push of warm air associated with this, which will help to make the forecast even trickier when it comes into the weekend as far as the precipitation types. And then for southeast Alaska, another mostly sunny day down there with this stationary boundary just pulling away, no real active weather associated with that. For Friday then, we do see some of that precipitation in the form of snow make its way into the Cook Inlet region. Right now, just expecting this to arrive mainly on Thursday night into early Friday. We do expect maybe about an inch of snow around south central when you get into the Cook Inlet region, but there definitely could be more snow on the upwind side of the Chugach Mountains and the coastal Kenai Mountains. It'll be rain along the coast as some warm air does make its way in, and we'll start to see those temperatures trend upward. Along the west coast, expect another bout of snow as that area of low pressure draws a little bit closer, and this will definitely bring in some more gusty southerly and southwesterly winds. We'll see an area of mixed precipitation south of the low, but then rain all the way on the north side of the low, wrapping up into Russia there. For southeast Alaska, expect a little bit of snow to make its way into the northern portions. Chilkoot and White Pass could see some snow on Friday, and all of this will just be working from west to east. Well, were our high temperatures this afternoon, or at least our 4 o'clock temperatures, mainly in the teens and the low 20s for southeast Alaska. Much colder over inland areas where the continental or Arctic air mass has been set up, and so thus we see the warmer temperatures right along the coastal areas and dropping off markedly by the time you get into the Copper River Basin, minus 31. And mostly lower teens to the 10-degree range for much of south central Alaska. And as we look towards interior of Alaska, not a whole lot of improvement there, minus 14 and minus 21 at Fairbanks. As you climb up further to the north, very similar conditions, minus the negative 20s and the negative 30s until you get to the Arctic coast, where there is still a little bit of open water, helping things to stay just below 0 to about 10 below 0. Out over the west coast, that's where we've seen that warm up already start to take place. Bethel jumped up 20 degrees in about a 12-hour period yesterday, so that's a pretty impressive warming trend, and that, as you can see, has started to migrate all the way up the west coast into the mid-20s. For southwest Alaska, 35 degrees this afternoon at Bethel. That's pretty remarkable for the middle of December, especially what they have been. And then as we look towards the Alaska Peninsula, low 40s and upper 30s. What do you expect for tonight? Still clear and cold for southeast Alaska, single digits to the low teens. For south central, areas along water will be in the low single digits to the low teens, except as you move into interior areas, expect temperatures between minus 20 and minus 30. Out over southwest, there's our area of much warmer air, low 20s to upper 20s even. And then along the Arctic coast, expect temperatures about 0 to 10 degrees below 0. For tomorrow's high temperatures, a little bit warmer than today, climbing up into the upper 20s for much of southeast Alaska, and a little bit warmer also for south central. We'll see temperatures in the low 20s. It'll feel relatively warm out there, considering that we haven't seen those temperatures for about 10 days. As we get over towards the interior portions, look for temperatures between minus 10 and minus 20 for many locations. Towards southwest, it'll be similar conditions tomorrow with highs in the low 30s. And then up along the Arctic coast, we'll expect single digits up there. So for our flying weather, you can see here plenty of IFR conditions along the west coast with that snow falling, blowing snow helping to reduce visibility. Not going to be a great day for flying, and a fairly widespread area of MVFR in between these two systems. And then there's another pocket of IFR tomorrow morning with our second low that's developing. By tomorrow afternoon, very similar conditions persist with those IFR conditions along the west coast. As for south central and southeast Alaska, you can see that high pressure will continue to keep things good for flying there. And with that, our passes are looking pretty good. We're going to be VFR at all passes except for Lake Clark and Merrill. We'll be going from MVFR to IFR as that moisture makes its way in. Rainy will be going from VFR to MVFR. But otherwise, windy, Isabel, Mantasta, Tanita, Portage will be VFR becoming MVFR, and Chilkoot and White all VFR. So pretty good day for flying if you are east through the Alaska Range or to the east of the Alaska Range. And then for tomorrow's freezing levels, again, that warm up starting to push that 2,000-foot line a little bit closer to the Alaska Peninsula, and there's another pocket of warmer air at about 4,000 feet, otherwise hugging the coastal areas for the surface line. Looking at tomorrow's icing, you can expect it above 3,000 feet along that frontal boundary for the Kodiak region, and then dropping a little bit to 2,000 feet further to the north. And then again, with our stronger system, expect some light to isolated moderate above 3,000, a little bit farther to the north near the Gulf of Anadyr, and then out over the western Aleutians above 5,000. So there again is that jet at 175 knots, helping to support our areas of low pressure out over the western Bering. And then it comes over into the state of Alaska, diving in from the northwest. A small area of 70 knots coming out of the southwest into the Cook Inlet region. And then our more impressive jet for much of the lower 48. If you have family or friends down there, you've probably been hearing about their weather. 135 knots pushing into the west coast, bringing some storms into those regions. Taking a look at the 9,000-foot winds, again, this is the area we're going to focus on associated with our area of low pressure at about 80 knots at 9,000 feet. So pretty strong, bringing strong southerly winds with a quick turn here along that front, so about 65 knots. And then out towards southwest and south central, mainly southwesterly winds about 20 knots, and then becoming northerly by the time you get over the Panhandle. Taking a look at 3,000 now. Similar conditions, still 75 knots at 3,000 feet in that sting jet portion of the storm, and then becoming quickly to the south. So we're going to see a sharp turn here, and we'll notice that on the turbulence charts. Otherwise, you can see around the area of high pressure in a clockwise flow at about 25 knots out of the north. So what does that mean for turbulence? Well, we do have two areas of occasional widespread moderate. One is right along that frontal boundary. It's going to be a narrow area, but below 4,000 feet. And of course, that'll be working its way from west to east. This is just a snapshot in time. And then below 5,000 feet associated with those stronger winds wrapping around that area of low pressure. Stay tuned. We'll be back with your marine forecast.
Now, not all locations operate 24 hours a day. A lot of them close down overnight. If you have a forecast for a weather reporting and forecasting station which does operate less than 24 hours a day, you're going to see something interesting on that. What you're going to see is a TAF amended that says nil amendment and gives you the hours that that particular location is closed as far as weather information is concerned. This, by the way, can be a good indicator to you that the airport does not report weather on a 24-hour basis. Essentially what this is telling you is that even if the forecast weather changes dramatically for this airport during these hours when the weather observing is closed, you will not get an amended terminal airdrome forecast. Now, what if forecasts would be issued during the time that weather facilities are closed at a particular location? Then what you're going to see is a TAF that looks like this. It's simply going to say nil, in other words, no forecast issued, because we don't have any weather observing going on there. And then the end of record indicator, that equal sign. The nil appears in the place of instead of the forecast text. After two complete observations are received at that particular location, then a delayed forecast will be issued. This can have a significant impact on your flight planning if the weather in the area of your destination is generally lousy. You may not be able to get a forecast for your destination before your departure. And for flight planning, you might have to rely on nearby facilities and area forecasts during that period. Let's talk about the wind. The third W, wind, is coded just as the METAR winds are coded. A 3-digit true direction to the nearest 10 degrees and a 2 or possibly 3-digit, depending on the wind speed, code for the wind speed. And then KT for knots afterwards. Forecasts of gusts will be noted, as will variable winds, just as they are in the METAR. In this case, what we've got is a pretty nice wind, a wind from 270 degrees true at a wind speed of 10 knots. Now, what would it look like if we had calm winds here? Calm winds would be coded with all zeros, 5 zeros here. If the winds are expected to be variable, the way the wind group would show up is like this, VRB for variable, and then the wind speed. These winds are variable in direction at a wind speed of 3 knots. Now, if you've got a pretty strong wind or gusty wind, it would show up like this. A variable wind, it's still variable in direction, of 16 gusting to 28 knots. This is different than METAR because there's no provision in the TAF code for indicating the variable wind direction. There's nothing after this to tell you the direction that the wind is variable between. You just know that it's variable and you know the wind speed, 16 gusting to 28 knots. This is used only for very low winds or when convective activity is forecast, and in either case, nobody really knows what the wind direction is going to be. Okay, after we've decoded the 3 W's, what are we looking for? We're looking for visibility. Visibility here, just like in the METARs, the visibility will have the letters SM for statute miles after the visibility, just to remind us that this is visibility and that it's forecast in statute miles. If the visibility is forecast to be greater than 6 statute miles, what you'll see is P6SM standing for plus 6 statute miles or greater than 6 statute miles. Now, the weather and restrictions to visibility are coded with the same codes that are used in the METAR reports. In the TAF, restrictions to visibility are only included when the prevailing visibility is expected to be 6 miles or less. So you might, for instance, see 6 statute miles with haze, 5 statute miles with smoke, or 2 statute miles with mist. The sky condition will be reported in the TAFs in the same way it's indicated in the METARs, except the only specific cloud type forecast in the TAFs will be cumulonimbus clouds, CVs. If they had to pick only one to tell us about, I'm sure glad they picked that one, because that's really important information. So let's take a look at our sky conditions. If it shows up as SCT 005, BKN 025CB, what that indicates is a forecast of 500 scattered, ceiling of 2,500 broken with cumulonimbus clouds. Remember that the ceiling is the lowest layer of broken or overcast clouds. If you have clear skies, what you're going to see is SKC in there if the skies are forecast to be clear for that time period. If the sky is expected to be obscured by a surface-based phenomenon, then VV will show up with the vertical visibility. In this particular case, vertical visibility is 800 feet. Indefinite ceiling, 800 feet. Now, the TAFs in the U.S. prepared by the National Weather Service will not include forecasts of partial obscurations. Like in the METAR, the ceiling layer is not designated specifically in the coding, but it's the lowest broken or overcast layer, in this case the broken layer, at 2,500 feet, not the scattered layer, because the scattered layer is not the ceiling, or it's the vertical visibility into an obscuration. Now, sometimes in the TAF you will see a forecast of low-level non-convective wind shear, WS standing for wind shear. Low-level non-convective wind shear is forecast when wind shear is expected to exist anywhere up to about 2,000 feet AGL. What our coding here means is that wind shear is expected to exist at 1,000 feet AGL with winds from 310 degrees true at 22 knots. And then at the end, we have our equal sign, which is our end of report indicator.
And welcome back. Let's jump right into sea ice now. Some of our forecasters, Mary Beth, was helping us out here, and she was looking specifically along the west coast and up all the way through the Bering Strait there. She's noticed several spots that have opened up that were solid ice pack. The main ice pack have now started to see open leads here just north of Nunivak Island and stretching all the way up through the Bering Strait past Point Hope there. So some ice has broken up under this strong southerly flow, and we do expect that trend to continue as these storm systems move through with strong winds and a lot of warm air associated with them. So be advised of that if you have any plans to travel out in those regions. Taking a look now at our southeast marine forecast, you can see strong northerly winds through Lynn Canal, 30 knots and 5-foot seas, so we do expect some freezing spray in those areas. Higher gusts associated with that as well, gust 40 to 45. Northeast 25 knots, a little bit closer towards the Petersburg region, 6-foot seas, and then becoming northerly 15 knots, 3-foot seas. Out over the open water is actually a little bit calmer, northeast 20 knots and then north 10 knots, becoming easterly at 15 knots for the northeastern portion of the Gulf, and seas generally between 5 and 6 feet. Now on into Friday for the southeast. All the offshore areas will go 20 knots out of the west and between 7 and 9-foot seas, and then start to see things improve for the interior portions, 3 to 4-foot seas, and generally out of the southeast between 10 and 20 knots. For South Central, you can expect northeasterly flow to continue as this last day of high pressure remains in control. 10 to 15 knots, and that'll be over the inner portions of Cook Inlet and the western portions of the Barrens. Seas 2 to 4 feet. And then again, out over the open waters, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming southwesterly at about 10 knots south of Prince William Sound, and seas between 5 and 9 feet. A little bit calmer there in the protected portion of the Sound, and a little bit more gusty along the Kodiak region, Shelikof region at 20 knots out of the south. And then on into Friday, we start to see some influence of the frontal approach. Northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming more south and southeasterly 25 to 30 knots. Seas generally running up from 3 to 9 feet as you move towards Shelikof. And then southwest winds for the most part becoming easterly over Prince William Sound, about 20 to 30 knots down there, and 8 to 13 foot seas. Seas will be on the rise on Friday. Looking for south to southeast winds, 15 to 40 knots across the Alaska Peninsula, and seas running up from 4 to 12 feet. And then on Friday, there's where we start to see those real big seas move in associated with our strong low pressure, climbing all the way up to 19 feet and out of the south-southwest at 30 knots. For the Aleutians, here's where we have our hurricane force wind warning, out over the western portion of the Aleutians with those 65 knots and then stronger gusts, mainly out of the south-southwest, anywhere between 50 and 65, and seas are going to be building quite quickly up to 48 knots. Strongest seas will be south of the chain on the Pacific side, but even on the Bering side, expect upper 30s as far as the seas. Then on Friday, some improvement as the storm tracks to the east and weakens a little bit, but still 50 knots out of the west with some higher gusts. Seas generally running between 25 and 35 feet across the Aleutians. Going to be some rough conditions out there for mariners. Up towards the west coast, we do see southeasterly winds dominating between 30 and 50 knots, and some higher gusts and freezing spray up near St. Lawrence. And then on Friday, expect a little bit more southeasterly becoming southwesterly flow, anywhere between 35 and 40 knots, seas between 15 and 25 feet. For the Arctic coast, expect easterly and then southerly winds between 20 and 25 knots, and all ice covered up there, and then 10 to 30 knots out of the east for Friday's forecast. Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.